what I saw were different types of protesters, but you had the critical mass. And somebody texted me, and a reporter colleague, and she kept texting me, who was there? Who was there? And MAGA, I mean, obviously, it was connected directly to the President of the United States. And I have said that he bears full responsibility for what happened, because the speech, this was one continuous motion from the speech at the Ellipse near the White House, the march of the tens of thousands, the populist march, was scheduled as the Wild Protest, and wildprotest.com was up until it wasn't anymore.
So what is wildprotest.com?
Wildprotest.com was an information site which I didn't get to see because I didn't click on it in time before it was taken down. But a conservative contact sent me a full list of the events that were happening the night before the BLM Plaza, and there were certain websites that were listed from organizing bodies. Wildprotest.com. If somebody is good at finding websites through Google Cache, it would be very interesting to look at it. But it was a populist website that was promoting what the President of the United States himself termed was going to be a wild protest. They ran with it. Whether people knew, how much people knew or didn't know, is very similar to the protests that we have seen all year long. They were autonomous in nature in the sense that you had all these different, not everybody was paramilitary. And some of those guys, I mentioned the Viking, I would say were even performative.
Right. I must say there's something about the focus on the Viking. I think people have the sense there's something very wrong with that, and therefore we're just going to, broadcast images of it. But I'm not more disturbed by the Viking. In fact, the Viking, in some sense, seems to me like, and I've seen some things on your Twitter feed and elsewhere where he's interviewed in other contexts, and while I think his understanding of what's going on in the world is incorrect, I understand where he thinks he is. So I don't see him as sort of the high watermark of evil. I see him as an interesting measure of just how divergent the mindsets have become. But before we get there, you say you acknowledge you don't know how many people were there. I feel certain the federal government must have a near exact count, because surely those plazas are amongst the most monitored places on Earth, and probably that count was generated automatically by systems that just simply can detect the fact of humans as individuals. Yeah. But what I don't want to gloss over is the people who breached the Capitol were a small number of people benefiting from, I've forgotten your phrase, but basically the fact that the crowd changes the game theory such that a small number of people can do things they couldn't do under ordinary circumstances. What was your term?
You have cover.
You have cover.
From thousands of people, yeah.
Cover, which is exactly the same thing that I have argued creates looting, which is that a system that is built to prevent theft on an ordinary day is overwhelmed by natural or artificial events, and at the point people realize that system has been momentarily suspended, they do things they wouldn't otherwise do. But nonetheless, cover exists. But let's say it's thousands to tens of thousands of people who are present, supporters of the president. Those people were not in on, nor were they necessarily even aware of the breach of the Capitol. My understanding is many of them were far enough away that they learned about it later. Is that accurate, or? I
would say that it was the rhetorical pattern. The rhetorical message was to essentially lay siege to the Capitol. In other words, the first people that I interviewed, I went up, that's the other thing I was trying to say, is you couldn't get up, so you had to go up scaffolding, or you had to scale the wall itself, which we've seen many images of people doing. So I was going up this rickety scaffolding. People were climbing, Spider-Manning their way up in the interior of the scaffolding. So it was this elaborate march to the rotunda. That group that was out front, that was paramilitary and eccentrics like Viking or the guy from Brooklyn with the pelts. He was like a Jewish kid that was, you had these performative eccentrics that were in on the drama of it. But you had serious paramilitary folks, and I speak to one in a live stream on my Twitter, which is at Lee Quinn, and I did a live with him 2 nights later in front of the Capitol, and he called himself pro-coup. He was, even after that, he was still, and
wait.
Yeah.
You got to slow down there, because there are two mirror image versions of the term coup circulating in the same story, right? So my understanding is a great many of the people who stormed the Capitol believed they were preventing a coup. And you're talking about somebody who is pro-coup.
Right. So I'm trying to, not only pro-coup, he identified himself as a right extremist. He said, I'm an extremist. I said a fascist. He said, I like to say federalist. And then he espoused some very, I would say, unpalatable views, but he was very honest about who he was.
Such as
Weimar Germany and National Socialism, and then you start to go down that cultural rabbit hole that is very niche, in my opinion, of what we would call racist.
A neo-Nazi.
And without wearing any affiliations, I would say he satisfies the requirement that the leftist activists have been looking for, and I have been looking for, because I've constantly said, well, the MAGA people as a whole, I'm not finding that. There may be outliers. Well, he was and I asked him, well, how many of you were there in your crew, in your unit? And he kind of, danced around it. It didn't seem like he had a huge crew, but he was defining himself as paramilitary, pro, coup, and as an extremist dedicated to the President of the United States. So I did find one, and I did interview him.
Cool.
Yeah.
You found one, and we will get back to him. But
yes.
So at the very least, in terms of our gallery of different perspectives that were present, you have a genuine neo-Nazi, self-defined, I would say.
Yes. He says federalist, but yeah.
He says, National Socialist.
Right. Well, when he starts talking about it in a positive light, then you start to say, okay. We know where you're coming from.
I don't think we need to split hairs.
Right.
Right. He's definitely in the neighborhood of a neo-Nazi.
Yeah.
We've also got a guy clearly carrying a Confederate flag in our Capitol.
Yes,
right?
the report said at least one, and I don't know what that means. If there were other pictures.
Let's say we've got at least one,
yes.
Right? That's a pretty dramatic invocation of a very particular thing that the left, frankly, alleges is commonplace. And I don't think it's as commonplace as the left says, but there it is in this particular incident.
Well,
you also have, what are we calling the guy with the horns on his helmet?
I'm calling him an eccentric and a shaman, a primitivist of some sort. He has this sort of paganist vibe to him.
Yeah. Okay. Primitivist, paganist. Yeah. I've heard him called Beowulf, which I think, frankly, is not a bad nickname in this case. But he isn't, I'm not defending him, but he isn't like those other two examples. He is his own outlier, and less of an outlier because what he says in interviews that I've seen with him, I went looking for his YouTube channel, which is now suspended.
Oh, really?
Yep, it's gone.
Huh.
So I wasn't, and we will get back to that because I think this disappearing people's channels is a part of the big story here, and I'll get back to why. But in his case, what he says in the clips that I've seen, he is convinced of the QAnon understanding of the events of the recent past, and he is there defending. I mean, it's very much, I would say, a much more standard view on the Alex Jones right? He's espousing a view in which there are globalists, that they have targeted the U.S. Constitution, and he is there defending the nation and that document, right? Which is a very different motivation than the Confederate flag guy or the National Socialist Federalist that you met. And so anyway, my point, I think this will be obvious to people who know me, is not that I'm defending any of these things. I don't think any of them are defensible, and none of them justify the breach of the Capitol. But the point is, you have an eclectic mix of people who breached the Capitol. You have a much larger group of people who were present, who provided what you said was cover, who were responding to a message about a wild demonstration, a wild protest. But here's what I think is afoot here, or at least partially. Wild protest could mean something symbolic, right? Wild protest, and I don't know, it sounds like you've seen at least recordings of what was on that website. I'm not even aware that the website existed. This is the first time hearing of it. But you could have a symbolic protest, which many of us would agree is a legitimate response to concerns about the way the wheels of government turn. And the fact is, we can't hold people to the standard of only the accepted facts, because the problem is, if it's only the accepted facts, then those who control what is accepted control, obviously protest has to be able to voice concern about things, even if it's not true. So the question is, what is the interaction between a president who is, I think, clearly sympathetic with people who were involved in something that I think is insurrection, right? His encouragement of a large number of people to protest something in a way that could have been simple symbolic speech. It could have been civil disobedience. It ended up involving a small number of people with cover, or a small fraction of them breaching the Capitol. But how are we to sort between these things? It's not one group of people of one mindset. It is an eclectic mix of people who seem to agree on one thing loosely.
Right, and it's populism, and it's a cultural populism that binds it all together under leadership. And this is, I had a terse, we'll get to it later, but I had a terse exchange with a leftist keyboard warrior type journalist, activist journalist, and we'll get into how that plays into all this. And one of I point out that the tactics between the leftists, were appropriated, but also they had leadership. And they had the President of the United States uniting them in leadership to follow their emotional through line to wherever it was going to lead in this spirit of insurrection. The things I heard said, the comments, of course, were 1776 will commence again. I've been seeing that all summer long in response to COVID restrictions and what is defined as government overreach.